right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to lesson 5.1, congruence in triangles. So what we're going to do now is go beyond this idea of just a congruent side, a congruent measurement, a congruent angle, and we're going to start looking at what triangles are actually congruent. So we already have this definition of congruency, and we've already talked about corresponding when we were in chapter 3, but we're going to take a look at this with triangles. So we have a few vocabulary that we need to go through. Corresponding parts. When we start talking about corresponding parts, you're going to see that a lot in today's examples. It's the sides and angles of any two triangles that are in the same position. So which angles are in the same position, which sides are in the same position. And so we'll get to some examples where we'll be able to show you these corresponding parts. But we're going to talk about sides that are in the same position, angles that are in the same position. Congruent. I added the word figure here because we want to talk about what it means to be a congruent figure. We already know what congruent means. Congruent means to be equal, to have the same measure. Congruent figures are geometric figures when all parts of corresponding angles are congruent and all pairs of corresponding sides are congruent, which means basically you have the exact same shape. They're identical. You could cut them out, lay them on top of each other, and they would be exactly the same. All right, so example 1, we need to list corresponding parts. So they're going to tell you that triangle JKL is congruent to triangle SRT. They're telling you that these triangles are congruent. List all corresponding congruent parts. The cool thing is, ladies and gentlemen, is they've already given that to you. The name gives you the corresponding parts. So if you look what I put it in red, put it in bold, put it in all caps, this is part of the solution. So the order of the letters in the names of the triangles shows which parts are corresponding. So we'll look up here. J corresponds to S because they're the first letters. K corresponds to R because they're the second letters. And L and T are going to be corresponding parts because they are the last letters. So when we start talking about listing corresponding sides, corresponding angles, we're going to use our name to help us. So because triangle JKL is congruent to triangle SRT, angle J is congruent to angle S. So angle J is congruent to angle S. Because in triangle JKL is congruent to triangle SRT, K is congruent to R. K is congruent to R. And we can actually see that from this picture. They're both 90-degree angles. And last but not least, JKL is congruent to triangle SRT, so L is congruent to T. Now here we start talking about sides. So I need to construct or need to connect corresponding sides. Sides are the segments. So side JK is congruent to SR. So JK, J to K. J was congruent to S, so I start at S, go back to R because R is congruent to K. So the order is the same. I took the first letter in each triangle and connected it to the second letter. JK is congruent to SR. Because triangle JKL is congruent to triangle SRT, KL, if we look at where KL is at, that has to be congruent to RT. K is listed first, so R has to be listed first. Those corresponding angles still help us name our sides. And then last but not least, JL, we connect J to L. If I start at J, that means I have to start at its corresponding angle S and connect up to T. So we have S is congruent to T. So once again, going through this name, we went J to L, I'm going S to T. I'm going K to L, I go R to T. The names that they give you in those triangles, ladies and gentlemen, tell you how to name your corresponding parts. So, the checkpoint. I'm going to do checkpoints a little bit different in some of these lessons. These are going to be our warm-ups. We are going to walk through these together. I think this is so important to make sure you get it correct, give you a chance to ask questions right together. So we will do together. So we will do in class. All right, triangle 2. It says write a congruency statement. So the two triangles at the right are congruent. We need to write the congruency statement. So identify all four congruent parts. So we have to figure out which parts are congruent. Then we want to write the congruency statement. So the congruent angles, what happens here is they mark congruency for us with these congruency symbols. So your book starts you off with angle A. I want to know what angle A is congruent to. So I look at A. A has these three congruency symbols. I need to find the angle in the second triangle that has three congruency symbols. So if we look, angle F has three congruency symbols. Angle B, I want to know what angle that's congruent to. So if I look at angle B has one congruency symbol. So I find the angle that has one congruency symbol. And so that's going to be angle D. And then last but not least, angle C has two congruency symbols. So I find which angle has two congruency symbols. So angle C is congruent to angle E. Well, now I need to name congruent sides. So they start you off first by telling you to look at A, B. I'm going from A to B. I started at the 3 mark angle, and I went to the 1 mark angle. So I have to start at F, which was A's corresponding angle, and go to B's corresponding angle, which is D. So that means AB is congruent to FD. BC, I start at B and go to C. The 1 mark to the 2 mark. I start at the 1 mark and go to the 2 mark. B's corresponding angle was D. C's corresponding angle was E. So DE is the congruent side. And last but not least, AC. We want to know what that's congruent to. So I'm starting at A and going to C. I'm going from F to E. So it's congruent to FE. Now, if we take a look back at the diagram, guys, it was already marked for us. If we look at AB, AB had two congruency symbols. FD had two congruency symbols. BC had one congruency symbol. DE had the one congruency symbol. And then AC had 3, and FE had 3. So you're going to be able to use quite a few things. Angles from corresponding position to corresponding position, and then all of your congruency symbols. We need to list the letters in the triangle names so that the corresponding angles match. It says use the order from part A is one possible congruency symbol. So if they give us triangle A, B, C, they've started us with this. What do I have to write? Well, you have to write your triangle. A corresponded to F, so I'm going to put F. B corresponded to D, and C corresponded to E. So this is one congruency statement I could write. But we're simply matching up those congruent angles and putting those angles in the same order to name the two triangles. All right, we're going to do the follow-up. We will do together in class. All right. Now we want to use the properties of congruent triangles. They're going to tell us that triangle PQR, so I go from P to Q to R, is congruent to X, so that means X and P are congruent, to Y, that means Y and Q are congruent, to Z, so that means Z and R are congruent. It says find the length of XZ. Well, XZ goes from red to blue. X to Z. I need to match up the same congruency, P to R. So because XZ and PR were congruent, that means the measurements are equal. So PR is equal to 10. I need to find the measure of angle Q. Well, angle Q is this green angle that we matched up. Q matches up with Y in my name. So if Y is 95 degrees, Q would go back to angle Y. Measure of angle Q is equal to the measure of angle Y. So it's equal to 95 degrees. But once again, guys, we're matching up the names, we're matching up the positions, and then matching up the measurements. Checkpoint. If we look at triangle ABC being congruent to triangle DEF, find the length of DF. DF is the first to the last. That means I'm going to match up A to C. So if AC is 3, that means DF has to equal 3. I want to find the measure of angle B. B matches angle E in our congruency statement. So if E is 28 degrees, that means the measure of angle B is 28 degrees. All right, use the triangles below. Which congruency statement is correct? We will do in class. All right. For example 4, we need to decide whether the triangles are congruent or not. And so we're going to use the two triangles at the right, identify all pairs of corresponding parts, and then determine if the triangles are congruent. If they are congruent, write the congruency statement. So the angles, I can look at angles, and I can say that angle D, that's the first one they want us to match up with, so we have angle D. When we look at that, angle D is matching up with angle G. So angle D is congruent to angle G. If we look at the next angle they tell us to look at, that's angle DEF. We want to know what that's congruent to. So you need to be able to trace that. We go from D to E down to F. So we're looking at this angle here that has two congruency marks in it. That means we're going to match it up with this angle over here. I can't just use letter E anymore because there's two angles there, so I have to name that angle. If I started at D to name our first angle, I have to start at G. So we're going to say angle G. We travel up to E and down to F. So GEF. Then I'm going to look at angle DFE, and I want to write its congruency statement. So once again, if I start at D, I have to start at G here. I need to travel down to F, so I have G to F, and then back up to E. The other way I know is this has 3 congruency. These have 3 congruency. It then says to match up any sides. Well, I'm looking at my sides, and EF is congruent to EF. That's the first statement they tell me. This side shows up in both triangles, so that means EF on each triangle is congruent to itself. They want me to look at DE, and so DE has 2 congruency symbols. I need to match it up with 2 congruency symbols, so I'm going to put them in order, G, E. D and G were congruent, so G and D need to come first in both their names. And then DF has 1 congruency symbol. I'm going to match it up with 1 congruency symbol over here. If I start at D and go to F, I need to start at G and go to F. So segment GF. So because we have 3 sets of corresponding angles, 3 sets of corresponding sides, that means triangle DEF is congruent to triangle. Name them in order. D goes to G, so G. E, and then F. What is the property that tells us that? This is going all the way back to chapter 2, I believe, and this was our reflexive property. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, example 5. I want to do all of that together with you in class. And so we're going to stop our video here. I feel like this is a really important diagram, a lot of good geometry here, and so I want you guys to be able to ask questions. So this is going to be the first time where we don't finish notes together. So at this point, the video is done. You need to come with everything completed through example 4. other than the checkpoints that we're going to do together in class. So we will see you tomorrow.